Okay, very good morning to all of you.
Good morning,
Good
sir.
morning,
Good
sir.
morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning,
Good
sir.
morning. Okay, I hope that the screen is visible. Nikita, can you confirm?
So all are there, and the screen is also visible, so we can see your
No, no.
PPT.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Okay. I seem to have some connectivity issues today, so in case I get disconnected in between, please do let me know. Okay.
Sir, I guess
So
your
we were
voice is
talking about
lagging.
glycogen. Okay, but am I audible
Yes, sir.
clearly?
Yes, sir. You are audible. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine.
Yes,
So
sir.
maybe I'll just keep my video off so that we don't face any issues.
Yes, sir.
So, in case of glycogen catabolism, we need to understand that there are several components that you need to keep in mind. Okay, first and foremost is that when you talk of reserve food material in several organisms, glycogen is the most preferred component, right? And let me tell you that glycogen is always stored in the form of these granules, which we refer to as the beta particles or the glycogen granules. So, if you feel that glycogen granules are those constituents which contain only glycogen, that is incorrect. Okay, because these granules not just contain glycogen, but they also contain some other components like enzymes which are required for synthesis of glycogen, enzymes that are needed for degradation of glycogen, and also the components which are required for maintaining a balance between synthesis and degradation, which means the regulatory machinery. So it's not just containing glycogen, but all that which is needed to synthesize and degrade glycogen is also present as a part of the glycogen granules. Okay, so this is something that we need to keep in mind. Now, please understand that when you talk about metabolism of glycogen, muscle and liver, they metabolize glycogen in a in a specific fashion, in a specific manner. And even if you compare the process between the skeletal tissue and the liver tissue, it is not exactly the same. There's a lot of similarity, no doubt about it, but there are some subtle yet striking differences that you can see when you talk about catabolism of glycogen in muscle and liver. And how can we forget that glycogen will be, catabolized in a different way if it is coming via food? Because, several
Hello, sir. Sir, we can't hear you. Arvind, is sir audible to you, or is it
No, I think he
no?
lost
Right?
his connection.
His connection. Okay. Yeah, I'll ask him.
okay, where did you guys lose me?
So last we heard that how can you forget the food which we consume? That was the last thing.
Sorry for this. I don't know what is wrong. Uh, so what I was talking about is when you consume food that is rich in glycogen, the steps of metabolism is going to slightly change because now glycogen is going to be subjected to the process of digestion. Okay, so we need to understand that if you compare the process of digestion and if you compare the process of catabolism of glycogen in skeletal muscles and liver, again there's going to be a difference. So what I'm trying to explain to you guys is that the difference in the procedure of metabolizing glycogen is going to be based on where it is being metabolized. So the site where glycogen is going to be catabolized is going to bring about differences in the process of metabolism. Now you would say that why is such a difference there? So the difference is on the basis of why glycogen is being metabolized there. There has to be a reason. Is it for energy purposes or is it for supplying the energy source to the rest of the body parts? So on the basis of that, there is going to be difference in the process. But before we understand all that, it's very important to know some basic terms related to glycogen metabolism. So to begin with, we have something called as glycogenolysis. As the word itself indicates, it is splitting glycogen to give you glucose 6-phosphate. So breaking down glycogen to glucose 6-phosphate is what we call as glycogenolysis. What is glycolysis? So glycolysis is breaking down glucose 6-phosphate up to pyruvate. I'm sorry for the error in the spelling of phosphate. So breaking glucose 6-phosphate to the level of pyruvate is what we refer to as glycolysis. Then what is gluconeogenesis? Gluconeogenesis is also referred to as reverse glycolysis, which means that you are going to synthesize glucose from pyruvate. You're going ulta of glycolysis. That is what you refer to as gluconeogenesis. Okay, so you're going to be learning both the pathways. You're going to be learning glycolysis as well as you're going to be learning gluconeogenesis. Then you have something called as glycogenesis. Genesis, this name itself stands for synthesis. So when you are synthesizing glycogen from glucose, you are going to refer to it as glycogenesis. Okay, so I hope these 4 terms are clear to you. Glycogenolysis is wherein you're breaking down glycogen to glucose 6-phosphate. Glycolysis is wherein you are breaking down glucose 6-phosphate to pyruvate. Gluconeogenesis is reverse glycolysis, wherein you are synthesizing glucose from pyruvate. And glycogenesis is wherein you are synthesizing glycogen from glucose. Okay. Now, let us understand how glycogen is broken down in skeletal muscle and liver first. Okay. So you need 3 set of enzymes for this. First enzyme is glycogen phosphorylase. The second enzyme is glycogen debranching enzyme. And the third one is phosphogluconeotase. Okay, I repeat the names of the enzyme: glycogen phosphorylase, glycogen debranching enzyme, and phosphogluconeotase. So these are the 3 enzymes that you need to catabolize glycogen. So let us see what each of one is going to do. Now, first and foremost, if you talk about glycogen phosphorylase, look at this image very carefully. You will see and understand what the enzyme is up to. As the name suggests, phosphorylase, this enzyme is going to be very different in breaking glycosidic linkages, because understand that glycogen is a polymer of glucose. Okay, it's a polymer of glucose wherein glucose units are linked together by alpha 1,4 glycosidic bond. Okay, now normally an enzyme, like amylase, which breaks alpha 1,4 glycosidic linkages, it's basically a very simple enzyme. But the basic problem with amylase like enzymes is that it is unable to conserve the energy which is there in glycosidic bonds. ओके क्योंकि वो सिर्फ बॉन्ड तोड़ देता है, वो ग्लाइकोसिडिक बॉन्ड में जो भी एनर्जी स्टोर्ड होगा वो यूं ही रिलीज हो जाता है. इट इज नॉट गेटिंग कंजर्व्ड एट ऑल. बट ग्लाइकोजन फॉस्फोराइलेज is different from enzymes like amylase, because while breaking the glycosidic bond, okay, it acts as, you know, the non-reducing end. Okay, so it's going to act over here, it's going to break this bond. I hope you all are able to see the pointer. Okay, so it breaks the glycosidic linkage over here. And what does it do? The name is phosphorylase because it's going to add a phosphate to the glucose that is being removed. So after breaking this bond, it's going to attach a phosphate group there, thereby forming glucose 1-phosphate, because it's attaching the phosphate group to the first carbon. So you get glucose 1-phosphate. Okay, so the glycogen phosphorylase is breaking the glycosidic bond, attaching a phosphate group to the first carbon of glucose and giving you glucose 1-phosphate. So, you know, whatever energy was there in glycosidic bond, that is conserved by forming this phosphate ester of glucose, which is glucose 1-phosphate. So whatever energy was there in glycosidic linkage now is stored in this phosphate ester bond. So the energy is getting conserved. Okay, this is very, very significant. And the another faida of this is that ultimately these glucose molecules are now going to enter glycolysis, right? In glycolysis, you know that you have to spend ATP molecules to add phosphate groups to glucose in phosphorylation steps. You have learned this in 12th standard. Glucose to glucose 6-phosphate. So you used to use an ATP there as a source of phosphate. Do you remember that? So you're spending energy there. But in this kind of a scenario, you don't have to spend ATPs because you have already phosphorylated it while breaking down glycogen itself. So you are saving a lot of energy. Now your question should be, sir, we understand that we are saving energy because we will not be using an ATP anymore. So what is the source of this phosphate that you are adding in this reaction of forming glucose 1-phosphate? So this phosphate is coming from a cofactor. The name of that cofactor is pyridoxal phosphate. Pyridoxal, pyridoxal phosphate. That's the source of phosphate group over here. Pyridoxal phosphate normally is known to have a very significant role in amino acid metabolism. Okay, it's a very rare function that it, you know, a cofactor like pyridoxal phosphate is having a role to play in glycogen catabolism. Okay, is it clear till this point to all of you as to what is happening here?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
We are at the very first step because we are having 2 more steps to go, right? So let us see what the next enzyme does, which is glycogen debranching enzyme. So it's very important for all of you to understand that glycogen phosphorylase is going to act at non-reducing ends, but it cannot act at branching points. And you know that glycogen is a branched polymer. So it cannot act at the branching points. It cannot act on alpha-1,6 glycosidic linkages. It just doesn't work that way. Now, something very interesting has been noted with glycogen phosphorylase. Glycogen phosphorylase acts at non-reducing ends, and it is going to act only till the point it reaches 4 residues away from the branching point. देखो branching point ये है हमारा, right? और glycogen phosphorylase उसके 4 रेसिड्यू पहले ही रुक जाएगा. So the enzymatic structure of my glycogen phosphorylase is such that it has an arm which recognizes the branching point, which is the alpha-1,6 glycosidic linkage. So वो arm जैसे ही recognize होगा, glycogen phosphorylase would stop. Now 4 residues का reason ये है कि the arm which recognizes this branching point is having a length of 4 glucose residues. So it recognizes the branching point and it's going to stop there. It will not continue the breaking of alpha 1,4 linkages. It's going to stop the moment the arm of the enzyme recognizes the branching point, and that arm is long enough to accommodate 4 glucose residues. So see, it stopped here, exactly 4 residues before the branching point. Okay. Now post this, the phosphorylase will not be able to function. So it needs another set of enzymes, which is your glycogen debranching enzyme. So your glycogen debranching enzyme is going to do the function of removing the branches from this point. तो ये जो yellow residues दिख रहे हैं, यानी कि 4 residues है मेरे branch में, उसमें से 3 रेसिड्यू काटकर उसको लीनियर पॉलीमर में ट्रांसफर कर दिया जाएगा. So you can see what has happened. It has been cut from the branch and it has been transferred to the linear polymer. And 1 glucose residue is still left. So that will be cleaved again by the debranching enzyme, and that glucose will be set free as it is by the debranching enzyme. So the glucose at the branching point is going to be set free by the debranching enzyme itself. But the 3 glucose residues before it is going to be transferred to the linear chain, such that now only a linear polymer is left. Okay. So we said that glycogen phosphorylase can recognize branching point using the arm that it has in its structure, and as soon as it recognizes the branching point, it's going to stop its activity. So that is 4 residues before the branching point, because that's the length of the arm of the enzyme. After recognizing this, as the phosphorylase stops working, the debranching enzyme will come to the picture. It is going to cut these 3 residues and transfer them to the linear polymer. The single glucose residue left at the branching point will also be cleaved and it will be set free. Now the polymer which is left behind, that can again be acted upon by your glycogen phosphorylase. So phosphorylase can once again become active once the branching point is removed, and it can continue its work by acting at the non-reducing ends, and it can release out glucose 1-phosphate. Is the concept of debranching enzyme clear to all? Are there any questions about it? Please let me know.
No, sir, it's clear.
Okay,
So it's
fine.
clear.
Let's go ahead and let's see what happens. Once again, very closely over here. I have just split that earlier image into portions so that it can be seen clearly. So you can see that the very first step is wherein glycogen phosphorylase is breaking it down and it stops 4 residues before the branching point. Then the debranching enzyme comes into the picture, and it's going to be responsible for transferring the 3 glucose residues to the linear polymer, cleaving the bond at the branching point and releasing the glucose free. And now this polymer can be acted upon by glycogen phosphorylase once again. Okay, fine. So let's go ahead. So that's what we were discussing, that what is the difference between phosphorylasis and hydrolysis. So phosphorylasis is wherein you are breaking the glycosidic bond using glycogen phosphorylase, and hydrolysis is wherein you are using enzymes like amylase. I have already told you the difference. The basic difference is that the mechanisms vary, and secondly, in hydrolysis, wherein amylase like enzymes are involved, they are not conserving the energy which is stored in the glycosidic bond. Okay, while in phosphorylasis, the phosphorylase is trying to conserve the energy which is present in the glycosidic bond by forming phosphate esters of glucose. So that is one of the most important differences that we need to note when we are talking about phosphorylasis and hydrolysis. We have already discussed that pyridoxal phosphate is the cofactor which is responsible for donating the phosphate group to glucose. Now we come to phosphoglucomutase. Please understand that this enzyme is very, very significant. Why is it significant? It is significant for a basic reason that till now you have formed glucose 1-phosphate. Glucose 1-phosphate cannot enter glycolysis. You know that intermediate of glycolysis is glucose 6-phosphate, not glucose 1-phosphate. So you will need an enzyme now to convert glucose 1-phosphate to glucose 6-phosphate, right? So for this you require an enzyme, and that enzyme is phosphoglucomutase, because you're just changing the position of the phosphate group. अभी हमको लगेगा भाई ये बहुत आसान सा प्रोसेस है, फर्स्ट कार्बन में से फॉस्फेट निकालो, 6 कार्बन पे फॉस्फेट डाल दो, बट ये ऐसा होता नहीं है. अब ये प्रोसेस होता कैसे? नाम में ही तुम्हारे फॉस्फो है एंजाइम के. ओके, so this enzyme is itself a phosphorylated enzyme. So you can see here the serine residue in the enzyme phosphoglucomutase is having a phosphate group attached to it. This is your glucose 1-phosphate, wherein on the first carbon you have a glucose. You have a phosphate. Okay. So now what you're going to do is, the first task that you're going to do is, ये जो एंजाइम है, जो फॉस्फेट ग्रुप एंजाइम के पास है, वो फॉस्फेट ग्रुप को हम 6th कार्बन ऑफ ग्लूकोज पर अटैच कर देंगे, such that the product that I get now has 2 phosphate groups, one at the first carbon which is already present in the substrate and another at the 6th carbon. So you're transferring the phosphate group of the enzyme to the substrate and you are attaching it on the 6th carbon. So the product that you form is glucose 1,6 bisphosphate. Bisphosphate, this term itself indicates that you have 2 phosphate groups. 1,6 indicates that one phosphate is at the first carbon and the second phosphate is at the 6th carbon. Okay, so now after losing the phosphate group, the enzyme is in its unphosphorylated state, but it's not stable in that state for long. So you have to give its phosphate group back. So now what do? I will remove the phosphate on the first carbon of glucose and give it to the enzyme, such that it gets converted back to phosphorylated form of the enzyme. And what is left behind is glucose with a phosphate group on the 6th carbon, which is glucose 6-phosphate. Let me repeat it quickly. We said that we are carrying out this reaction to convert glucose 1-phosphate to glucose 6-phosphate. The enzyme which does this is phosphoglucomutase, which has a phosphate group on its serine residue. We said in the very first step, the enzyme will transfer its phosphate group to the 6th carbon of glucose, such that now glucose has 2 phosphate groups, one on the first carbon, another on the 6th carbon, and the product you get is glucose 1,6 bisphosphate. But the enzyme in its unphosphorylated state is not stable for long. So you have to give the phosphate group back to it. So that you are going to remove from the first carbon of glucose and phosphorylate the serine residue so that the enzyme goes back to its normal state. And what you are left with is glucose with a phosphate group on its 6th carbon, which is nothing but glucose 6-phosphate. So this is how glucose 1-phosphate will be converted to glucose 6-phosphate, and now this is free, to enter into glycolysis. Now, one point that I forgot to mention was about the debranching enzyme. The glycogen debranching enzyme has a name, a long name, which is oligo 1,6 to alpha 1,4 glucan transferase. Okay, I repeat it, oligo alpha 1,6 to alpha 1,4 glucan transferase. Oligo alpha 1,6 to alpha 1,4 glucan transferase. Now, it's very simple as to why it has been given this name. It has been given this name because you are transferring glucose residues from alpha 1,6 linkage to alpha 1,4 linkage. That's why the term alpha 1,6 to alpha 1,4 glucan transferase. Okay, because you are transferring these 3 glucose residues to the linear column. Okay, So you will find that name in the book as well, but I wanted you to remember that it also has this long name associated to it. Now, how does this process differ when it comes to the liver? Please understand that we have discussed this earlier also, that when you are fasting or you don't have enough glucose in the bloodstream, liver is going to help restore the glucose level in the blood. Okay, so whenever blood needs glucose, liver is the one which comes as the savior. Now, please understand that liver has an extra enzyme for this purpose. Okay, other than what we have discussed till now in glycogen metabolism, there is an extra enzyme which is associated with, the liver, and that enzyme is what we call as phosphatase. Okay, now this is a very, very significant enzyme, glucose 6-phosphatase, because please understand that if blood needs glucose, liver cannot release it into the bloodstream as glucose 6-phosphate. It has to remove the phosphate group and transfer glucose to the bloodstream. It cannot be transferred into the bloodstream as phosphate esters. The transporters do not allow that. Okay, so for this purpose, whatever glucose 6-phosphate was formed till this point, क्योंकि बाकी सब process same रहेगा, ग्लाइकोजन फॉस्फोराइलेज, डीब्रांचिंग एंजाइम, फॉस्फोग्लूकोम्यूटेज, वो सब लीवर के सेल में भी काम करते हैं. तो वो ग्लूकोज 6-फॉस्फेट जो साइटोसॉल में बना हुआ है, उसको पहले एंडोप्लाज्मिक रेटिकुलम के अंदर लिया जाएगा. Okay, the internal environment of endoplasmic reticulum is what you call as ER lumen. Lumen means the internal space. So that glucose 6-phosphate will be taken inside the ER lumen, for which you need a specialized transporter called as glucose 6-phosphate transporter, which is also called as T1 transporter. The moment glucose 6-phosphate is taken inside, the enzyme phosphatase is membrane bound. It's going to convert glucose 6-phosphate to glucose and inorganic phosphate. Now this glucose and inorganic phosphate, both of them will be brought out into the cytosol. Okay, how will they be brought out? They will be brought out using another two transporters. The one which transports glucose outside into the cytosol is going to be the glucose transporter, also known as T2. And the one which gets the inorganic phosphate out of the ER into the cytosol is the PI transporter, which is called as T3. So T1 was the one which was taking in glucose 6-phosphate into the ER. T2 is the one which transports glucose out of the ER. T3 is the one which transports inorganic phosphate out of the ER. Now the glucose which has been brought out of the ER, that is going to be transported out of the liver cell into the blood by the transporter called as GLUT2. Okay, so GLUT stands for glucose transporter. Okay, so this GLUT2 transporter will be responsible for getting the glucose out of the liver cell into the bloodstream. So whenever there is going to be a demand for glucose in the blood, liver is going to be responsible for, getting the glucose 6-phosphate inside the ER lumen, converting it into glucose, and then delivering that glucose into the bloodstream. Now, other cells like the skeletal muscle cells or other body cells will not be able to do it. They will not be able to contribute glucose to the bloodstream for a basic reason that they do not have this glucose phosphatase enzyme with them. Glucose phosphatase is an enzyme which is solely present with the hepatocyte, which is only seen in case of liver cells. So liver is the only cell which has this ability of converting glucose 6-phosphate to glucose. Now in many people in the liver, this enzyme may be non-functional due to some kind of defect in the gene coding for it. So in those circumstances, they will suffer from glycogen storage disorders. Okay, like type 1A glycogen storage disorder. This is a disorder wherein excessive glycogen is stored in the liver, because the liver cells do not have the ability to transport glucose into the blood. Okay, because they lack the phosphatase enzyme. So they will surely break down glycogen to glucose 6 phosphate and use whatever is necessary for their own energy requirements, but they will not be able to contribute glucose to the bloodstream. And liver normally stores a lot of glycogen than what it is going to actually need, because it is a contributor to the bloodstream. So they end up storing too much of glycogen, which is called as the glycogen storage disorder. Okay, so we need to understand that depending on which enzymes are defective, there could be different kind of glycogen metabolism disorders that the individual can show. Now there were two scientists, Carl and Corey. This is a husband-wife pair who are known for their initial studies in glycogen metabolism. Okay, and they are the ones who found out different kinds of glycogen storage diseases, which are prevalent due to defects in the enzymes which are responsible for carrying out glycogen metabolism. So these were the two scientists who were also responsible to understand that the skeletal muscles, they can convert glucose to the level of lactic acid, and that lactic acid which is excreted out by the skeletal muscle tissue, it comes into the blood, it reaches the liver, and liver is that part of the human body which has also the ability to convert lactic acid back to glucose and then store it in the form of glycogen. The liver also has that ability of going reverse by converting lactic acid back to glucose. Though they did not elucidate the entire mechanism, but they were the first ones to study this in that time frame of 1925 to 1915. And they also won a Nobel Prize. And there are several Nobel laureates who come from the lab of Carl and Corey, who were trained under Carl and Corey, especially for genetic studies like discovering the DNA polymerase, or discovering the RNA synthesis mechanisms. All these scientists who have got Nobel Prizes for this kind of work in genetics have all been trained in the Carl and Corey lab. So the lab is very famous to have generated a lot of Nobel laureates. So after understanding the glycogen metabolism, we will be moving towards the starch metabolism. But before we go to that, if you have any queries related to glycogen metabolism, please let me know, or we are good to go to starch metabolism. Any questions? Any doubts?
Sir, I had one small doubt. In case of amylase, you said that energy is not conserved. So this energy is lost, or it has been converted to something
Indeed,
else which we cannot use.
Right. So in case of humans specifically, this energy is going to be lost in the form of heat. Right. That's the reason why we always say that whatever is the substrate that you make use of in the process of respiration, around 60 to 70% of the energy that is there in that substrate is lost always in the form of heat. And in humans, that heat may be utilized to maintain constant body temperature. But in other organisms, obviously it's of no use and it is just lost. So
Yes,
no,
sir.
it's not converted into anything else that can be used or that is then stored. It is just lost.
Yes, sir.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, I also have a question. Sir, in this intermediate step where we get a bisphosphate, it must be a high
Mhm.
energy. It must be requiring some amount of energy. So where does it come from?
You have to understand that when you're transferring phosphate bonds, the phosphate bonds itself have energy stored in it. So when you talk about the serine, phosphorylated serine residue, that bond itself has the energy to drive this process. You don't require an external source of energy to run this.
Okay, sir.
Any more questions? Okay, so let's quickly switch to starch. This is more relevant to our microorganisms because a lot of microorganisms have the ability to metabolize starch. So starch again is the polymer of D-glucose residues which are connected by alpha-1,4 and alpha-1,6 glycosidic linkages, which means that starch is also a branched polymer, right? And we need to understand that whenever a microorganism needs to break down starch, it needs to release extracellular enzymes, okay? Because it's very difficult for microbial cells to take the entire polymer inside and break it down. It's not going to happen. So they are going to secrete enzymes responsible for breaking down starch, and they are going to release it into the external environment, and the products of the degradation process is what they are going to take in and further metabolize it for gaining energy, right? So that is what we mean by exoenzymes, which means extracellular enzymes. Now, there are different sets of enzymes again, depending on the organism where starch is being metabolized. You have alpha amylases, beta amylases, glucoamylases, pullulanases, and isoamylases. So let us see what these enzymes are one by one. Let us first begin with alpha amylase. So alpha amylase is normally an enzyme which is seen in bacteria and fungi. It's an endoglucanase. Now, what do you mean by endoglucanase? It means that it can act anywhere in the polymer. It's not necessary that it's going to act at the non-reducing ends of the polymer. It can go and cleave alpha-1,4 glycosidic linkages at random anywhere in the polymer. But please remember that it specifically acts on alpha-1,4 linkages only. It's not going to act on branching points. It's not going to break the alpha-1,6 bonds. The alpha-1,6 bonds will be left as it is. What it can act on is alpha-1,4 linkages, and that too at random. So it's not that it's always going to act on the non-reducing end. It can go anywhere in the polymer and it could act on these bonds. Okay. Now the products that are formed are dextrin, maltose, and glucose. Now dextrin is nothing but multiple residues of glucose, including branched glucose. So it's like breaking down the polymer into a smaller version of the polymer, but still you have a lot of glucose residues in it. That's what we call as dextrin, which means that alpha amylase needs to continuously act even on these dextrins to convert it up to the units of maltose and glucose. Okay. Now, in case of bacteria, this enzyme is very popularly found in all Bacillus species, Pseudomonads, Lactobacilli, and Aspergillus species. These are the most famous ones for synthesizing alpha amylase enzyme. Going to beta amylase. Beta amylase is different from alpha amylase because it acts only at the non-reducing end. It's an exoglucanase. It doesn't act inside the polymer. It acts at the terminal ends of the polymer. What is maltose? Maltose is a disaccharide, 2 glucose units. So it's going to remove maltose residues instead of single glucose residues. Okay, so it's gonna release maltose. So that maltose further has to be metabolized by the organism to produce glucose. Okay, this enzyme is very common in plants, comparatively less frequent in case of bacteria. It's called glucoamylase. Glucoamylase is very similar to beta amylase in terms of acting at non-reducing ends, which means it's an exoglucanase, but it doesn't remove maltose residues. It removes single glucose residues. Very popularly found in fungi like Aspergillus and Rhizopus. Okay. Other than this, you have pullulanase and isoamylase. These are debranching enzymes. So understood by this term itself that it's not responsible for breaking the alpha-1,4 linkages, but it breaks the alpha-1,6 linkages. So it's going to hydrolyze the alpha-1,6 linkages. Okay. Now pullulan, this is a polysaccharide, okay, which is found in a fungus, Pullularia pullulans, because of which it has got this name as pullulan. And it obviously contains D-glucose units only with alpha-1,4 and alpha-1,6 linkages. Okay, and to break, the alpha-1,6 bonds, you need pullulanase.
ओके सो अल्फा 1,6 लिंकेजेस जो है पुलुलैन पॉलीमर में, उसको ब्रेक करने के लिए पुलुलैनेज की जरूरत होती है. ओके एंड both pullulanases and isoamylase, they have their own mechanisms of working. So you cannot expect isoamylase to work on pullulan. It's not gonna work at all. So isoamylase can work on starch, wherein you want to break the alpha 1,6 linkages, the branching points in starch. Isoamylase is best there, while pullulanase is specific for its activity on branching points of pullulan. Okay. Now we need to understand that this specificity comes from the structure of both of the polymers, because you have to understand that enzyme substrate, they interact on the basis of their structural affinity. So that is the basic reason which brings about a specificity in these enzymes for their respective substrate. Now there is a lot of industrial significance for isoamylase and pullulanase because it uses debranching enzymes for degrading dextrin, which has been formed by the action of alpha amylase, because alpha amylase cannot act on the branching point. So you obviously need something which can act on dextrins and remove the branching point residues so that you are breaking it down to the level of disaccharide or monosaccharide at least, right? So industrially, this enzyme, debranching enzymes, both pullulanase and isoamylase have a lot of significance. So if you see this image summarizes the action. You can see alpha amylase can act anywhere. So even at the center, even anywhere in the between of the polymer, it can go and act. It is just that it cannot act on branching points, right? Then you have beta amylase, which acts at non-reducing ends and it removes maltose residues, right? Then you have glucoamylase, which also acts at non-reducing ends, but it removes glucose residues at a time. And then you have pullulanase or isoamylase, which acts at the branching point, right? So this image is a very good way of representing the point of action for these enzymes specifically. So that is about starch. Are there any queries about starch? Because they are very simple once you understand glycogen. So if you have any questions about starch metabolism, please let me know. Anything that you have a query about in starch metabolism? So we are still in breakdown of polysaccharides. We have just completed 2 polysaccharides, one being glycogen and the another being starch. We have one more polysaccharide, which is cellulose. Okay. We will start with it, but we will not start with the degradation part. We will see the basic intro part of cellulose degradation. And the degradation, I am not starting because we'll not be able to finish. We have only 5 minutes left. So we will just see the basic intro. Cellulose is also a polymer of glucose, but there is a difference. The difference is that the glucose residues are connected by beta 1,4 glycosidic bonds. Okay, it's not alpha 1,4, it's beta 1,4 glycosidic bonds. What is that? So have a look at this. You need to understand the difference between alpha glycosidic linkages and beta glycosidic linkages. In alpha glycosidic linkages, you will see that the hydroxyl group at this first carbon of your D-glucose residues, they are going to be, the hydroxyl group is going to be below the plane, यानी कि इसके नीचे होगा, central plane के नीचे होगा. Okay, so that's when you are able to form a alpha glycosidic linkage. But if the hydroxyl group is above the plane, if it is here, then the linkage that is formed is not alpha glycosidic linkage. You call it as beta glycosidic linkage. So alpha glycosidic linkage is wherein the hydroxyl group of the first carbon of one glucose residue is below the plane, and beta glycosidic linkage is going to be formed when hydroxyl group is above the plane, because this affects the conformation of the bond. The position of the hydroxyl group is going to affect the conformation of your bond. That's why you name it as alpha glycosidic or beta glycosidic linkage. I hope this part is clear to you. Have you understood why alpha and why beta, or when alpha and when beta glycosidic bond?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's go back to where we were. Now, the problem with cellulose breakdown is that the breakdown process is extremely slow. For a basic reason that cellulose in the nature is never as just cellulose. It's always surrounded by another very stringent polysaccharide, which is very difficult to break, which is lignin. Because cellulose is a plant material. Lignin is also found in plants. It's also a polymer of sugars. And it's always, cellulose is always found closely associated with lignin structurally, because of which it becomes difficult to break down cellulose because the outer coating is of lignin. So degradation is comparatively slow. The structure of cellulose is very compact, has a very crystalline and crystalline structure that you will see. But in many cases, you will see that in nature it is there in the amorphous form as well. Okay, so it is prevalent in both the forms, crystalline as well as amorphous, and the structure is very compact. If you see cellulose and if you try to study how many glucose residues it has, the number is enormous than what you can actually find in probably starch and glycogen. So it has enormously huge number of glucose residues. To break such a compact structure, you are going to do a lot of mehnat. Okay, and organisms also which can break this are, not all. There are specific criteria of organisms which can do this, a category of organisms which can do this, like Cellulomonas, as the name itself suggests that they are cellulose degraders. Gliding bacteria like Cytophaga and Sporocytophaga, Streptomycetes. Then the rumen organisms in the cow's rumen, Bacteroides, succinogens, and Butyrivibrio fibrisolvents. Obviously, because they consume so much of plant material, they need to have, cellulose degrading microorganisms, and that's the reason why cow dung is considered to be the best source of cellulose degradation or cellulose degrading microbes. Then Clostridium thermocellum, then you have Trichoderma rhizi. These are all some of the organisms which are known to be cellulose degraders. Even our Bacillus is a notorious cellulose degrader. Okay. Now, how this is done is what we are going to learn in our next class. And let me tell you that it needs a very, stringent. The degradation process will not reach its completion. So it needs endo-beta-1,4-glucanase, which is also called as CX cellulase. You need exo-beta-1,4-glucanase, and you need beta-1,4-glucosidase, which is also called as cellobiase. So it's going to be very similar to what you saw in case of starch. An enzyme which acts in the polymer internally, an enzyme which acts at the terminal end, and the enzyme which acts on the breakdown products of this endo and exo glucanases to reduce it to disaccharides or monosaccharides. Okay, so that's the set of enzymes that you will find here also, just like what you saw in case of starch. But what it does and how exactly it acts is what we will see in our next lecture. Okay, the link for the test will be active from 2 p.m. today on the site. So I have told you that you have time till Thursday midnight to complete the test. Okay, we will be meeting on Thursday in the afternoon for an extra lecture. So that has been also updated on the site because we couldn't meet last week and we are running horribly behind what we should be according to the lecture allotment. But that is, as I said, I don't want to rush over things, and biochemistry is something that people just snap out very easily. So I don't want that to happen. So please cooperate. I expect your cooperation over here so that we are able to complete the syllabus in a precise manner wherein you are learning things and not just rushing through it. So that is it for today. See you all on Thursday, and please attempt the test. Don't make me say that why haven't you attempted it. Don't do that. Take your time, read things,